So the last wine we're going to look at today is the Cryer Vineyard. It's the Reserve. Xavier, do you want to give a little introduction to this? What, because it's a big change in style.
So the Reserve is it's the best wine we'll make every year from that vineyard, which will always be a blend of the three varieties. It will always have a lot of new oak, but for a limited period of time. The way we make those reds is we age them for the first a year in barrels, and mostly old, but some new. And the new is used for the Reserve mostly, and a bit with the Cab Sauv Shiraz. And then we rack them off lees to foudre, so 4,000-liter barrels, old barrels, where the oak's supposed to be integrated. There's a very slow oxygenation as well of the wine before it's bottled. The reason we do that process is the way the vineyard is planted and the bunch exposure we get from the close spacing. We get more tannins. And actually, as I'm talking to you, I just received a report from the AWRI. We did a tasting yesterday with Tony, Nick Ryan, Tim White in Adelaide with some of the best, well, all the best Cab Shiraz in the country at the moment. And there were 14 wines. And apart from the Penfolds, from probably some obvious reason, we have the highest tannin level in all the wines, including, some of the wines that are $350 or $400 a bottle. Mm-hmm. In all our three wines. And that's why we always knew that. We always knew there were lots of tannins. I can actually taste the tannins before vintage, before we harvest. I can taste that very dark, chocolatey fruit character of tannins. And that's why we're using that process to try and integrate the tannins in, and also the oak in the wine before we bottle. The Reserve for me is the 16 was just an amazing vintage. It was extraordinarily warm, like more than an average Barossa vintage for Coonawarra. So if you want to know how Cab Shiraz or Cabernet from Coonawarra would look like if it was on Terre Reserve over limestone, you look at 2016 Coonawarra wines and you have your answer. And but it's a beautiful year, very challenging, but low yields, very ripe fruit. We harvested without any burnt, damaged fruit. It was quite clean. And we didn't have any raisins or any overripe fruit. And for me, I'm very happy with that wine. It's a wine that will last for a long time. It's still very young, still very compact, but it will. I'm hoping it will be very drinkable again in 40 years, and I'm hoping I'll be there to taste at that time as well.
I mean, I know Tony's a big fan of this particular wine. Tony, what can you say about this wine? And in terms of how do you see it against, other prestige wines in South Australia?
Yes, thank you. I mean, it was a really interesting tasting yesterday with those other, the 14 wines all up. The Cabernet Sauvignon Shiraz and the Reserve were both in that in different tiers. So this Reserve was in the top tier in terms of prices and kind of, I suppose, iconic kind of naming rights for some of the other wines, and I and several others in the group probably marked it as one of the three top wines in that area in that particular league. What I love about this wine is that, and I mean, it's got nothing to do with any of my knowledge of the technical side that Xavier was just talking about, but notes from two lots of tastings now talk heavily about the integration of the oak and the tannins and the concentration of the fruit, and they're the things that I look at separately on separate notes, separate books. Didn't have any reference points, just tasting, and they were blind. The second lot was blind. They were my notes. That the integration of and the tannins provide what I have described as an exact grip and tension that matches the concentration of the fruit. And to me, that was a really critical part of the structure of the wine, of the total pleasure of the wine. I love the fact that for me, this blend is at its best when you get that lift of beautiful Cabernet aromatics to start with. In this case, there can be all sorts of debate about the mint or the eucalyptal kind of character in it, which is obviously something that comes out of that southeast area fairly regularly. My notes are that there was a little subtle sense of that, but nothing overriding. But the extract and the concentration and the depth and layers of this wine, to me, it's really the thing that really gives it that reserve, special kind of nature that sits it above the others in the group and sat it up there with the best of the top tier of those other Cabernet Shiraz. I just thought it was really engaging. You could sit with it and go, and it developed in the glass. I think it became more and more engaging as the glass was exposed. And with that all in mind, I'm guessing it's going to last much longer than I'll ever live. And hopefully, Xavier, I have no idea how old you are, but it might go all the distance as well. But I just found it really, it just had this really evocative and really intense, for an intense wine, it was a really evocative wine as well. And to me, I loved it. I loved it.
How about you, Chantal? How do you see this wine?
Yeah, it's definitely a powerful wine. I think that all of Xavier's wines showcase that his consideration for longevity and ageability in terms of wines. I like that fact that you, Tony, you just mentioned that little hint of eucalypt. For me, it's a lot more of the wintergreen. It's this lovely, really pretty wintergreen element that I don't see so much as that kind of harsh eucalypt element, which adds to it, and very, very luscious on the palate. So I think a wine that's going to last a very long time, and stylistically a wine that people ask for as well.
I mean, I guess one thing worth opening up to everybody is, the oak in that wine. Like it's got a fair whack of oak. We actually don't see that many wines with that much oak these days. Andrea?
Well, I'm usually pretty sensitive to oak and pretty scathing of anything that's really heavily over oaked. So I don't have any complaints in my notes here. So the fruit intensity and concentration clearly balance that oak regime, and the oak regime is clearly justified here. I think the one thing I do see, and it's probably just where it's at in its evolution, is the finish is quite drying. And that's obviously because of the tannins and the oak. And I've sort of written a note saying, with some additional time, that's probably going to evolve. It's also the style of wine that you tend to have with, a beautiful meal where the tannins aren't going to be as prominent as they are on my dining room table right now. But at that reserve level, often I have seen a lot of over-oaked wines, or wines that are being masked by their oak regime, and I don't see that here.
No, it kind of has a claret-like edge to it, doesn't it? It has it really has a claret kind of structure, and claret, class growth, classy oak kind of pizzazz to it. I think that particular wine.
Angus, you asked for some notes the other. I opened them a day or two ago, and I probably gave them an hour or so before I looked at them. And this was my pick of the wines, but only marginally above the previous wine. 24 hours, 36. There was a much bigger gap between the wines. And that was after I'd sent you the notes, which is a bit unfortunate, I suppose. But it had improved, and I'm just thinking. One of the things that I wondered about is you've got it under cork, and it just seems a completely different style. That brightness and freshness that you get in the first three wines, I didn't see. I saw other things, but I didn't see that. And I mean, is this a marketing thing? I mean, I know cork's been done.
No, it's not marketing. It's actually, we actually bottled that wine. We knew we were going on the cork. We bottled that wine on the cork, on the Diam, the new Diam origin, I think it's called, which is a natural kind of wax they use as a glue, so it's not chemical. And then we had some bottled as well on the Stelvin. We've been tasting that wine every 3 months. The first 3 months, I was going Stelvin hands down, abandoning cork and Diam, and that was it. And that was because we were going to get ready for the next vintage to be bottled. 6 months after was Diam, which actually was quite winning the contest. And then on the first day, and then the second day, we tasted the 3 wines again with the Diam, the cork, and the Stelvin. And basically, tasting it in a good way means not tasting on the bench, but at home and coming back to the wines and tasting without thinking about it too much. The wine that actually won was the cork. And because it actually, the Stelvin is good to retain the fruit and the freshness, and but the cork, for those complex wines which have drying tannins on the finish, they're quite complex, they're big wines. The very slow oxygenation is very good for the wine. And Brian has done that experiment. That's why he's using cork for his Pinot, and he would use cork for his Chardonnay if I wasn't stopping him. But it's the cork is you have to use the good ones, and we're using a very good one, which is the Massilva, which is tested for TCA. And the larger diameter corks, which actually have less chance to bleed, to leak. And but it's we think for the long run it's the best closure. And now, because of the problem the cork industry has in Australia, we can access the best cork, and they actually send you the best cork. So we've had so many issues in Australia, you know, some of all those beautiful wines from the 80s and the 70s, they're all crumbly corks. So I don't think we'll have that issue. But it's commercially challenging, cork, in Australia. But that's why we're using it only for the top wines. If it was only me, I would use, and also there's also the economic consideration. It's quite expensive, but I would use it for the Cap Sauv Shiraz as well. But it's more commercially viable to use Stelvin. But yeah, it's. I just wanted to reply to Jenny about the fact that I'm French and that I might surprise you even more. Is actually, I think, and especially after the tasting yesterday, I think if in South Australia mostly, and maybe parts of Western Victoria, we are more organized in the way we make those Cabernet Shiraz. And if there was more competition, and if there was more incentive for the top winemakers to make the blend, and as you said, if it was more commercially easy to sell, I think we would make wines that would be at the same level as First Growth. And I think it would be all First Growth level. It wouldn't be, you know, some of the best. We have the best vineyard, some of the best vineyards in the world for Cabernet and Shiraz. I think a lot of winemakers are, and for a good reason, we make great Pinot, but are trying to, you know, try to see the next generation planting new vineyards with new varieties, etc., which is all great. But they should also consider that to promote their country and their wine, that's the blend we should be making. And that's what we should be selling overseas. The only successful winery at the moment in Australia on export market is Penfolds. You know, when I mean successful, it means selling at the highest price point consistently every year in different countries, and people looking at it as you know, as they look at Bordeaux, they look at Penfolds like they look at Bordeaux, they look at Priorat, they look at all those Barolo, etc. And for one reason, is because most of their wines are Cabernet Shiraz blends. Even the Grange, and the Grange has a bit of Cabernet Sauvignon that makes a big difference, and the Saint-Henri as well. So I'm the biggest advocate to say that we should make more of this, and that, you know, top winemakers should be, you know, making more of those wines, and we would make fascinating wines. I mean, you know, now and for the future.
Xavier, I think that's a fantastic place to finish. I think we're all in this group, I'm sure we're all massive fans of Cabernet Shiraz, and see it as being really what Australia can do well. And I think we all commend you very much on those wines, and with some Cabernet Franc in there as well. So thank you, Xavier, very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Andrea, Mel, Ken, Tony, Shante, and Jenny, lovely to see you all talk about some wines. We'll do it again soon. Thank you.
Right. See you guys.
Bye.
Thank you.